Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part there for the 21st of June 2025. It's a Saturday morning and I'm a little bit late to it, but nonetheless here we are. We're going to start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, and you can find them in the description to the video below, linked there. 1,060 personnel lost, that's about where it's been recently. 1 tank, 5 troop-carrying AFVs, very low numbers in those categories. 19 artillery systems. There we have a number below the daily average for the first time in some time. And 116 vehicles and fuel tanks, which is so-so for that category. We have been used to some exceptionally high numbers and no other significant numbers there. Well, no other numbers to report outside of the drones. So I think that's a fairly quiet day at the office for the Ukrainians. Obviously, you know, it's a war zone. Things are still incredibly hot in a vast number of places along the front line. But you get my point contextually. You know, comparatively, this is a fairly low day. We'll look at Jakub Janovsky from Oryx, who actually has an analysis here, or his numbers show Russian losses are actually lower than Ukrainian losses, but remember these do not include motorbikes, buggies, quads, bukankas, SUVs, and that's where the Russians are being hit really hard. They aren't using so many combat assets, and so it can be a bit of a dangerous thing to draw conclusions from just these figures. However, they are interesting, useful to a degree, of course. Russian losses are 31, Ukrainian losses are 51, so quite a lot higher for the Ukrainians. For Russian losses, let's look at whether there is anything of high value here. No tanks at all, which is worth noting. We got 2 Riverlink pontoons were destroyed. What else? We have some. We have a book launcher, and then the rest of these are actually, or many of these are drones there, and then we have some trucks at the end. So yeah, a few bits of artillery, pontoon bridges, but otherwise not a great deal in that list. For the Ukrainians, we have typically quite a suite of mobility vehicles, including Soviet ones, BMP 1s and 2s, Marder, the German provided one, BTR, old Soviet one, YPR 765, the Dutch version of the M113. We also have the M113, the French VAB PVV 302 from Sweden, Mastiff from the UK, Kirpi from Turkey, FFG MRAP from Germany, Rochelle Senator from Canada. Then we've got the Max Pros from the US, Novator. Is that the indigenously provided one from, or built one from Ukraine themselves, and the Kozak too. Humvees, and there you go. I don't know what the Gyoza is. UAT-GYORZA. Let's have a look at that. UAT-GYORZA. Okay, it's a Ukrainian armored vehicle, so this is Ukrainian built one. Interesting. I hadn't heard of this one before. There you go. That's what it looks like. From Armo Tech, and that was premiering, when was this? February 2025, so relatively new. So it's actually, you can read that as quite good news that you've got a Ukrainian vehicle like this on the loss list. Yeah, it's a shame, it's a relatively new vehicle and it's been lost, but actually it shows that Ukrainians are producing and using new vehicles in order to lose them. So they are starting to stand on their own 2 feet a little bit when it comes to, particularly when it comes to mobility vehicles. There are some complaints, I guess, or it's not a complaint at Ukraine. They're going to find it very difficult to start tank production in the middle of a war, but they don't have the ability to produce their own tanks at the moment, and UAVs too. And then basically after that, just a few bits of artillery. So really, it's a case of a large number of infantry mobility vehicles. You don't know whether some of these are left over from, say, the Kursk attack previously, or whether these are just in the last few days that the Ukrainians have lost these. I presume this will be a legacy from, to a degree, a legacy from attacking into Kursk and from other areas along the front line. It's not necessarily in the last 24 hours of losses. Right, there was another prisoner exchange yesterday that took place. So it seems like there have been quite a few recently. I think it's the 6th since Istanbul. And that's really good news. Welcome to the soldiers returning home. Lots of images of happy soldiers. I think, again, these are, you can see a lot of them look older, but also ill or injured. I saw an interview with someone that was saying he had lost his arm as it was sort of swelling, and eventually the Russians amputated it. But yes, so that happened yesterday. Russia is forcibly recruiting Central Asian migrants with false promises of fast money through short-term contracts. Ukraine's intel report says no reports. Many are killed on the front, and among the latest dead, Uzbek and Tajik citizens used in the most dangerous sectors. This is, again, something we've seen throughout the war, using people from abroad to a large degree. This is a case of using those Central Asian countries that have close connections to Russia through the old USSR, using a number of these migrants as well. The promise of short-term contracts and fast money seems to go a long way with those who have been attracted to commit suicide almost on the front lines of Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian scouts here capturing 5 Russian assault troops near Pokrovsk, trapped in a basement and under grenade fire. The group surrounded the fighters, National Guard's 4th Chervona Kalina Brigade. You can go and check that out in the description. It shows that the Ukrainians are still attacking in some places. That's Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is pretty hairy, particularly to the northeast. SBU Special Operations drones are delivering precise strikes on Russian forces. Now, this is a staggering statistic that I'm going to hit you with. Over 860 Russians were hit in just 2 weeks by FPV drone operators from the SBU unit Alpha. So from one single unit, there have been 840 Russians hit by FPV drones. Now, we don't know the outcome here, but you can guarantee that those 860 are finding their way onto these loss lists. In 2 weeks, one unit in one place along the front line is taking out 860 personnel. That is absolutely staggering. Then you multiply that across the front line, you look at all these other units, and then you get to a number like 1,000 losses in a single day. And you think, actually, that is pretty plausible. Okay, this next quote or comment from a Russian is fascinating. This person is called Witnesses of Bayraktar, or the title is called Witnesses of Bayraktar. So bad news from the front, from a Russian point of view. After Magyar was appointed commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Unmanned Systems. So we know, and in fact, we've got a little article on that coming next. This is a good segue into it. Robert Brovdy, who's known as Magyar's birds, have done an immense amount over the last few years of this war. He has become a bit of a drone hero, a military hero for the Ukrainians. He's now been put in charge of unmanned systems forces. Now, this person is saying, since that has happened, a hunt for our bird farmers began. In other words, for our drone operators has begun. And we know that the point value for drone operators has been put up significantly, showing that from a strategic point of view, working out what they want happening across the front lines, drone operators are persona non grata. They are the target number one. From my own experience, this person says, I can say that the pressure on logistics has been eased, so they're not hitting our logistics so much, and all the efforts have been directed toward identifying and destroying our drones. When they figure out nests, as in drone operator emplacements, they use all means of suppression. They do not skimp, and they send HIMARS. They pay special attention to fiber optics. We need to strengthen camouflage and change positions more often. And of course, we need to intensify work on the enemy's birdhouses, so on the enemy's drone operators. It is practically impossible to beg for a missile or fab to destroy them. So whereas I have talked about I'm sure, fact that the Ukrainians are now using guided glide bombs to hit drone operators, like we have seen that. I've shown you the videos of that supposedly these are drone operator what this person will call nests. The Ukrainians are able to call on the aviation to help take them out. We've seen HIMARS be used. and obviously drones themselves. The Russians here saying, well, we need to do that back to the Ukrainians, but it's impossible to call for a missile or a guided glide bomb. It's just not going to happen. So interesting difference there, and long may that be the case. But certainly it seems that the Ukrainians are using are really aiming for these drone operators. In fact, I said that's a good segue on to an article next, but actually I had that for much later. So let's bring that in now, because I think now is the right time for this. This is in the Kyiv Independence. Ukraine unites unmanned systems forces with drone line units under new command group. So Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces, USF, announced on June the 20th the establishment of a new command group that will unite the branch with other top drone units in the country's military. Drones have become one of the defining tools of the full-scale war used extensively by both Ukraine and Russia for surveillance, long-range strikes and tactical battlefield firepower. The new formation will unite all military units of the USF with the drone line, which is a project launched by President Zelensky in February this year to coordinate and expand 5 of the country's strongest drone units. The new command umbrella was created to improve the efficiency of management, transform the forces, and adapt to the requirements of modern warfare. So there's no point doing these things multiple times in different in different areas or by different groups. Let's just streamline it and make sure it's all as efficient as possible. The units will operate within a single chain of command with a defined structure and a common vision of unmanned aerial vehicle tactics in order to harmonise approaches, establish joint work and use unmanned systems more effectively in combat, the USF said. The Unmanned Systems Forces were created as a separate branch of Ukraine's military in June 2024. At the time, Ukraine's strongest existing drone units served in other branches of the defence forces, including the Ground Forces, National Guard and Security Service of Ukraine. The newly created group will be led by Major Robert Borovdy, better known by its call sign Magyar, whom Zelensky appointed the commander of the USF in early June. Borovdy has previously served as commander of the eponymous Magyar's Birds Unmanned Systems Brigade, a founding member of the Drone Line Initiative and one of the most consistently high-performing drone units in the Ukrainian military. A world-first phenomenon, Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces works to improve the country's drone operations, creating drone-specific units, ramping up training, increasing drone production and advancing innovation. The USF has also carried out hundreds of operations deep within Russian territory. So, following in Ukraine's footsteps, Russian President Putin announced the creation of his own country's individual drone branch on June the 12th. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything else to add to that. So yeah, it just seems that they are making things just more efficient. Right, we're going to move on to tank numbers for the Russians and particularly production rates of the T-90M. This is an article by CIT, which is Conflict Intelligence Team, and it's a massive article. I mean, we're going to just go through the bullet points at the beginning, the key findings. This is a really extensive article, so you can knock yourself out and go and read this. It will be linked in the description, but get yourself a good cup of tea before going through that bad boy. So there's a lot of data, a lot of rationale going into this, but we'll look at the T-90 tank production numbers at the moment. Okay, how many T-90M tanks does Russia produce? Key findings. By the time serial production of the T-90M tank began in 2020, the Russian state-owned manufacturer Uralvagonzavod had produced between 120 and 150 original T-90 tanks for the Russian army, along with the 280 T-90A tank models. In the post-Soviet period, Uralvagonzavod managed to preserve its production capacities, including its ability to manufacture armoured hulls. At the peak of demand in the 2010s, the plant could produce 140 tanks annually, while also manufacturing tank assembly kits. By the outset of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Uralvagonzavod had launched serial production and modernisation of the T-90M, the breakthrough tank. That's what it's called, breakthrough. Delivering between 66 and 85 of these tanks to active units. An additional 10 were sent to the Kazan Higher Tank Command School. As of late 2021, the company aimed to reach an annual output of 60 tanks. Thus, by February 2022, the Russian army possessed between 65 and 85 T-90Ms, that's the best version, along with 370 to 380 older T90 variants. You also have the T90S, which is the export variant. Following the start of mobilization, all stored T90A tanks were withdrawn from reserves and assigned to several units within the Russian armed forces. The original T90s remained in reserve, but were subsequently sent back to Uralvagonzavod for modernization. According to our estimates, Uralvagonzavod produced 60 to 70 T90M tanks in 2022. In 2023, amid efforts to mobilize the defense industry, output may have increased to 140 to 180 tanks, and by 2024 it may have surpassed 200 units annually, possibly approaching a production rate of 250 to 300 tanks a year. That sounds like an awful lot to me. There were talks about T90Ms though being modernized from the other older T90 variants, and therefore the production includes modernization figures. The availability of new armoured hulls does not appear to be a limiting factor and has not impeded production. All T90M tanks currently being produced are newly built. So currently they're all newly built ones. So since the war began, at least 540 to 630 T90M tanks have been manufactured. This includes both newly built and modernised vehicles. Given that over 130 of them have been destroyed, an estimated 410 to 500 remain in service, approximately 15% of the tanks deployed on the front. This is interesting because you would expect at 15% of the tanks there to be quite a number of T90Ms hanging around. That's a considerable number, and yet we're not seeing them used much. Is it because they realise that tanks are not so useful as they were in the way that they are using them, that they're too vulnerable and so they're kept back? Are they, as some have been claiming, stockpiling these back in Russia for something else? Who knows? Uralvagonzavod is actively working to expand its production capacity. The company has issued tenders for the procurement and installation of welding stations and machining stands for tank hulls. This equipment is expected to operate 24/7, and these steps suggest a likely further increase in production speed. With armoured vehicle use and therefore losses expected to decline in 2025, current production levels will likely suffice to maintain the Russian army's tank numbers for at least several more years of combat operations. A substantial increase in new tank production would require far greater investments in new assembly lines and a significant expansion in the acquisition of modern machinery. Therefore, tightening sanctions and enforcing export controls remain essential to constraining the growth of Russia's military industrial capacity and to reducing the risk of renewed aggression against Ukraine or military confrontation with NATO. In other words, we really need to be putting a lot of sanction pressure on Russia, and of course that is less than forthcoming, particularly from across the pond. Okay, Ukrainian MRAPs, the Max Pro MRAPs here, are equipped with special cages to protect against FPV drones. So we've seen this with the Russians. Here are two with cages that give you quite some distance between the cage and the armour, and that's probably pretty sensible. You want those drones to explode as far away as possible from the vehicle itself, but there you go. I would presume that the drones would be trying to hit maybe, I don't know, here by the wheels or something, the tires, blow out the tires. I don't know. If I was flying a drone, what the weakest point would be concerning those MRATs. But there you go, a bit of Mad Max on Ukrainian style. Then what do we have? We have a Ukrainian UGV. So this is a unmanned ground vehicle, suicide drone. It drives into some military base and absolutely blows up. Absolutely blows up. It's a significant explosion that takes place here, and that, you know, it drives in and bang. I mean, that is pretty much, wow, that's just such a significant explosion. That looks pretty similar to a guided glide bomb to me in terms of the payload on that. And you wonder, I mean, I guess if you are going to stack up, I was not sitting or driving. I was in Lviv when they were testing a tracked UGV, and it was so impressive, and it could carry quite some weight. And you're thinking, you load those bad boys up with as much explosives as you possibly can, and you can probably do some. Well, you can do some real damage if that is indeed the UGV exploding there. Really impressive. Now, Zelensky has announced, I don't know quite what he means by this, but Russians had insane plans for Sumy region, quote, insane plans. But we are holding the line and destroying their forces. The region is defended, said Zelensky. And this is a big worry area, and it was, I think, supposed to be the big Russian offensive for the summer. And actually, it has been stalled. Dimko Zluktenko the other day was saying that his mate was up there, saying they're losing 10-1, the Russians. Anecdotal, but it is coming from not first hand, but second hand. But it's coming from Ukrainians saying, yep, they are losing the Russians 10-1 in that area. Just incredible losses. And in fact, Andrew Perpetua said, and these kind of anecdotes are super important because it's more than an anecdote. This is Andrew Perpetua looking at videos, like hundreds and hundreds of videos a day, and he gets to understand trend lines better than most other people certainly outside of Ukraine. One thing I've noticed, he said, about Russian assaults the past few days, they be dying. Piles of corpses. Zarina Zabritsky, who is Ukrainian and then sees quite a bit of other stuff and speaks to people, she says confirming. Have you noticed such losses before, or after some kind of decline, calm, are there meat attacks again? Andrew says losses are still less than winter, because winter was a huge problem for the Russians, but more than the first half of the month. So just, really picking up at the moment. And actually, there is evidence to support this. I'm not going to play you this, but this is the Sumy region again. Putin says we don't aim to capture Sumy region, so that's his official line. And meanwhile, in the Sumy region, this is a video of just lots of Russian dead bodies being caught on camera by a drone. It just flies over and it's littered with dead bodies. So if you're not trying to capture Sumy, then what are you doing throwing all these people into Sumy to be slaughtered? And so, you piece all these things together. Andrew Perpetua saying there are loads of Russians dying at the moment. Zluktenko saying, yeah, my mate up in Sumy says they're dying at a rate of 10-1. You've got Zelensky saying we're holding the line. They have insane plans for Sumy. You got Putin saying, well, we're not trying to capture Sumy. And meanwhile, there is visual evidence of lots and lots of dead people in Sumy. So there is that. Now, I don't know what to make of this. I don't know if this is something more widespread. You've got a guy on what looks like just a normal moped there, scooter. It's just a scooter. So explosive in OLX ads. I don't know what that means. New type of attack against Ukrainian military. It is claimed that 2 servicemen of the AFU died yesterday in Kharkiv as a result of an explosion of a scooter they purchased through an online platform. So these guys purchased the scooter, and just as the other guy comes out just around there, this scooter explodes. It really is quite a significant explosion as well. And that's a real shame that, 2 Ukrainian servicemen appeared to have died as a result of that. Another kind of supply chain thing going on there, this time the Russians doing that. Right, moving on to distance strikes. So last night, a pretty big attack on Ukraine. The numbers ticking back up again. 280 drones and missiles sent in. 272 of them were drones. 255 taken out, either shot down, 140 shot down, or suppressed by electronic warfare, 115 of them. That's actually pretty good as an interception rate. So 255 out of 272 means that there were 17 out of 272 that got through. I think that's not too bad. That's not too shabby. So real improvement there. It could depend on where these were sent. Well, actually, it looks like they were overwhelmingly sent to one place. There were also 2 Kinzhal missiles. 1 was shot down. 4 Caliber missiles. 1 was shot down. So none of them getting through. And 3 Iskander-K missiles. They are the cruise version of the Iskander. All 3 of those shot down. So some fairly decent numbers there. But Kremenchuk does look to have been targeted. Movement of air targets over the territory of Ukraine at night. And this is the infographic. Some going towards sort of Kiev and the northern areas. But most of them heading for Kremenchuk. Odessa was on the cards as well. So all of the missiles appear to have gone for Kremenchuk. And the vast majority of drones. Okay, we'll get to Kremenchuk in a second. But 2 Ukrainian servicemen, 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 2 Ukraini There's some stats that have been released by the GUR, the Ukrainian intelligence. Russia can launch up to 500 drones per day. So this is they can do it. Currently, Russia has more than 6,000 attack drones and the same number of simulators. So they've got 6,000 drones stockpiled, is what the claim is here. And at the same time, they can produce up to 170 a day. So when I often say they aren't, they would if they could, they aren't, so they can't. The idea is they can't produce and fire that many at the moment. Like they would send 500 a night every single night if they could, right? And that's my point. But they can send them, so that kind of goes against my point. No, that's the stockpiling issue. So they want to be producing 500 a day to send 500 a night, right? But they're producing 170 a day, so they're having to wait, stockpile to then get enough to send consistently 500 a night. Now they can do that, but so what it looks like they've done, if the GUI is to be believed, is they've stockpiled an absolutely staggering number of drones. And that means that they could send 6,000, except they wouldn't have the practical capacity to send them, to launch that many. But assuming they do have the practical capacity to send 500 because they've done it before, 479, then you can imagine, right, 500 a night for quite a few nights there. That's pretty incredible. So, that's 12 nights of 500 a night they could do. And if they did that night after night after night, Ukraine would be in a lot of trouble. So at the same time, they produce 170 a day. By the end of the year, they plan to increase production to 190. So there've been all these claims about producing 500 a day, 300 to 350. Here, the talk is 170 getting up to 190. I think there are different drones that are often being talked about. So some say Shahids, like your 131 and 136 Shahids. Then Garans, Gran 2, Gerbera, and all these other drones. Then you get decoys and simulators. So it's difficult to know exactly what numbers they're referring to when they say stuff like that. There's a claim here that Russian drone strikes on Ukraine might drop due to Iran-Israel conflict, according to Estonian intelligence. Iranian Shahid production capabilities have been targeted in Israeli strikes. The Estonian military intelligence commander Ants Kiviselg said on June the 20th, so there could be a benefit for Ukraine there. We then get a number of missiles from the GUR as well. Russia has accumulated over 1,950 strategic missiles of various types. 500 Iskander-M. Wow, that's a fair number. But then remember, what did they have before the war began? What number of these missiles? They also need to keep strategic reserves in case they get involved in a war outside of Ukraine, right? You can look at this and go, well, they're going to send all of those against Ukraine. If they did that, then the US, NATO, anyone else is thinking, well, now's the time to go on Russia because they literally have no missiles left. If planes can take up, what can they fire, right? Take off. So be wary about thinking all of these missiles are able to be used for against Ukraine, because that's not really the case. You could argue that actually this is what they should have as their strategic reserve, and that they have very few of all of these missiles for what they really need. But anyway, I don't know. I don't know the exact number that they need to keep in strategic reserve, and what they. I mean, obviously they would like thousands and thousands, but they have 500 Iskander-M. They're the ballistics. 300 Iskander-K, 260 KH-101, 280 KH-22 or KH-32, 400 caliber cruise missiles, 150 KH-47M2 Kinzhal. So 150 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles is a scary amount of Kinzhals. 60 North Korean-made KN-23 ballistic missiles. Of course, it depends on how many launchers they've got, how many planes they've got that can launch them, etc., etc. Here we've got a drone that appears to have been taken out by electronic warfare. Falling into the sea. That's an intercepted Russian drone, I presume somewhere near Odessa, but I'm not 100% sure. Right, on to Kremenchuk. So last night, the sky in Kremenchuk was glowing red again after an explosion. Some more drones have been shot down, but a lot more have arrived, and around 25 are surrounding the city, according to the local monitors. So considering they sent 280 odd, last night, and most of them went to Kremenchuk. You can imagine what it must have been like there. Massive attack on Kremenchuk, said Max 25. City under drone and missile fire for several hours. Dozens of explosions heard. Radio technology expert Flash suggests the main target of the Russians could have been the oil refinery. So if it was the oil refinery, then the Russians were able to hit Ukrainian oil infrastructure, but the Ukrainians, according to the Americans, are not allowed to hit Russian oil infrastructure. So seems to be rather unfair there. Let's start in Kremenchuk, said Tim White in his morning's thread, where Russia again attacked the oil refinery. Whether you believe all the missiles were stopped or not, we know drones hit the site even before the missiles were fired. Tribute to the firefighters who battle awful conditions and still work now. So this could really jeopardize Ukraine's ability to, well, A, make money, and B, produce oil for their war effort. Just one person was injured in Kremenchuk despite the massive onslaught. He's said to be in moderate condition. In the city itself, quite a bit of incidental damage, presumably caused by shrapnel and debris from downed drones and the blast waves from missiles, downed missiles, even from those shot down. And then we hear this. So not quite done with Kremenchuk yet, says Tim White. Take a look at these. Cluster munitions were fired, and these have been found around the city this morning in the wake of the attack. Each one is 10 centimeters in diameter. Kremenchuk has over 200,000 inhabitants. This is a war crime just there, sending in cluster munitions into a city of 200,000. Dangerous cluster munitions, says War Translated, remnants were found in Poltava region after last night's Russian attack, local police warn. The fragments, metal spheres around 10 centimeters wide, resemble toys or balls, posing a serious risk to children who might mistake them for harmless objects. There you go. It looks the size of a cricket ball. That is definitely not cool. Maybe a little bit bigger actually than a cricket ball. Yeah, that's horrific, isn't it? Now, according to Astra, Ukrainian forces hit Tula's Shipanov Instrument Design Bureau twice in 3 days, halting operations there on June the 20th. June the 18th. 5 drones damaged a power station, 3 warehouses and an admin building, sparking a 400 square meter fire. On June the 20th, 1 drone wrecked a loading hangar's roof and walls. We haven't heard too much about any strikes from last night, to be perfectly honest, deep into Russia. And actually, over the last few nights, it's been relatively quiet, it appears. Now, one place we do know much closer is Lugov in Kursk region. This is one of those staging posts. So Rilsk and Lugov are these 2 towns that are north of where the Ukrainians got to in Kursk that were used by Russians as staging points, and both have been struck consistently, even after the Kursk region has been retaken by the Russians. Lugov it appears to have been hit here, and there are some claims that it was a strike on a site where Russian forces were training assault troops, which is pretty risky to do so close to the front. But anyway, Lugov is really the only place that we know of. Now, I did report yesterday that something funky was going on near the Kazakhstan border and into Ukraine, where there were strikes at what looked like some kind of scientific or manufacturing facility. Previously unreported type of Ukrainian drone crashed in Kazakhstan, approximately 1,000 kilometers from the front line. Claims that it is a British-built Banshee drone are mistaken, but it is similar to that. So that is what the drone looks like, previously unknown Ukrainian drone. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. We're going to start with the Kremlin has officially confirmed that Russia does not want to end an end to the war. Moscow refuses to agree to a full ceasefire on the front lines as it plans to continue its offensive, said Dmitry Peskov. I read this yesterday. I just want to give you a number of different things that the Russians are saying to give you a full idea that they're not bloody interested in peace. So why particularly the Americans why the Trump administration is giving them all this elbow room to, I don't know. All the Russians are doing is delaying at the moment. Quote from Peskov: "Now we have a strategic advantage. Why should we lose it? We are not going to lose it. We are going further. We're advancing and will continue to advance. But America is not saying that we'll quit any supplies. Britain is not saying that as well. France is not saying that as well. This is a problem. So we'll keep going. The problem is that the allies are keeping on giving kit to the Ukrainians. So you can see the approach here is like, you guys stop giving stuff to them, we'll then win, and that'll be the end of the war. That's the end of the dying, the full capitulation of Ukraine. We've got Nebenzia at the UN. This is the best offer Ukraine can get today. Russia won't back down as renewed peace talks loom. Russia's memorandum on a peace proposal is, quote, the best offer Ukraine can get today. And it was a terrible offer. It was like full capitulation and, dismantling all of their own Western provided weapons and neutral country and no help from here, no troops on the ground, 5 of the regions given to it was just ridiculous, right? And they're saying that's the best offer you're going to get. Putin himself has said all of Ukraine is ours. Putin on Russia's territorial ambitions in Ukraine after they carry out this prison swap and whatnot. So Putin is telling you pretty damned clearly all of Ukraine is ours. Putin claims Russia is not seeking Ukraine's capitulation, but insists on recognition of the reality on the ground, a familiar narrative used by imperialists. We don't want you to completely capitulate, but the reality on the ground, in other words, we are continuing in a way that it looks like we do want you to completely capitulate. So it's perfectly obvious to me, and allies should stand strong with Ukraine. Stop giving Russia everything they want, which is time, a lack of sanctions, and a lack of military aid to Ukraine. Now, this is staggering. This shows how important the Strait of Hormuz is. These are just tankers, not any other types of boat. These are just tankers. This is tanker activity. I spent a lot of time the past week looking at data of the Strait of Hormuz south of Iran. So here's a quick animation showcasing the sheer volume of activity in the Persian Gulf last Friday. The data highlights tanker-only vessels. Tankers only. So the Strait of Hormuz there is where Iran might, sort of close it down. There were some crashes the other day. It might have been GPS spoofing. Other people say not, but whatever it was, that Strait of Hormuz is absolutely integral for the trade in oil. And that is also why oil prices spiking at the moment, not only just what's going on in Iran anyway, but also what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz more specifically. And the EU has delayed plans to lower the Russian oil price cap from $60 to $45 a barrel amid rising tensions in the Middle East. The issue has been dropped from Brussels' current agenda. So due to the volatility of geopolitics and due to the war in Iran, they have shelved the idea of lowering the oil price cap. Russian shadow fleet ship Marathon, also known as Udaya, has been filmed in Danish waters and is currently on its way to the Great Belt. The ship has a cargo of up to 100,000 tons of Russian oil and was also in Danish waters of the Storebelt last week. Here, according to the Danish Maritime Authority, the oil tanker deceived the Danish authorities by declaring a wrong flag and therefore sailed on. So it had a flag hung out the back and people monitoring were like, oh, no, that ship belongs to whatever. And it was just, they were just lying. It seems pretty simple. Declaring a wrong flag and therefore sailed on. But the ship is in fact stateless, which is illegal according to international conventions. So here we have the Russian shadow fleet deceiving the Danish there in order to get through and be able to transport up to 100,000 tons of oil. Right, okay, we're going to go on to the Russian economy. There's been a lot of talk at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. We're going to go through a few more and then get to Putin. Other opinions voiced at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Quote, the state may not have enough money. Head of the Duma's Budget Committee, Andrei Makarov, warned that Russia could follow the same path as the USSR. Quote, I must inform you that the needs of the working people will continue to grow constantly, but the state may not have enough money to meet those needs. Socialism collapsed simply because it failed to fulfill its fundamental economic law. We haven't even written own fundamental economic laws yet, he said. So, according to Makarov, solving problems without state involvement is impossible, but there is also no room for endlessly increasing budget spending. According to the Ministry of Finance, the liquid assets of the National Welfare Fund, which have been used to cover budget deficits and fund mega projects, have shrunk threefold since the beginning of the war. I reported that yesterday, to 2.8 trillion rubles. Estimates by the RANEPA suggest that the reserve could be completely depleted by 2026. So, that's what I said yesterday. Quote, the state cannot finance everything indefinitely. National projects are expanding in terms of funding, but government expenditures cannot keep growing forever. Unless we involve private business in this mechanism, the system simply won't take off. However, business participation in national projects on which the state is pinning its hopes for accelerated economic growth, technological breakthroughs, and solving demographic challenges is virtually non-existent. So these guys are saying, we need private investment and we're not getting it because we're at war and we've been sanctioned. This, Makarov noted, is a consequence of dysfunctional institutions, particularly the institution of private property protection. He hinted at the wave of nationalizations affecting companies worth more than 2 trillion rubles. He reminded the audience that private property is now being seized based on de facto abolition of the statute of limitations. Quote, the statute of limitations no longer begins from the moment an event occurred, but from the moment the prosecutor's office found out about it. And not just found out, but when for some reason the event didn't sit well with the prosecutors, Makarov said. And many are on the verge of default. A debt crisis is looming over Russia. The overall situation is quite alarming. Many companies are in a pre-default state according to their obligations, said Alexander Shokin. Central bank analysis has shown that 1 in 6 of the largest companies can't earn enough to cover even interest payments. Andrei Kostin, president of the VTB, Russia's second largest bank, said many companies are now operating and borrowing just to repay existing debts. In his view, the current crisis may present a good opportunity to get rid of inefficient enterprises that would be better off closed down. Okay, so has Putin pushed the Russian economy to its limit? Well, The Spectator has an article on this, where Putin used to boast of 2 consecutive years of 4.3% growth. The numbers now tell a different story. The party is over, so to speak, and it's time to tighten sanctions on Moscow. So this is a time we need to be putting extra pressure on Russia. Now Russia's overheated economy is finally starting to cool down. GDP growth slowed to a relatively weak 1.4% year on year in the first quarter of the year. It's weakest in more than 2 years. Business activity in January to March contracted by 1.2%, and all indicators point to a further decline. Even the manufacturing sector shrank to just 3% in April. The budget is starting to show alarm bells. The budget deficit in May widened to $2.5 billion since the beginning of the year, to $43.3 billion, or about 1.5% of GDP. Someone else adds here that's worth adding in. An important part to consider is that part of the GDP growth over the last few years is basically the difference of everything going to shit versus the astronomical rise of the military-industrial complex. So in other words, that the GDP growth takes into account absolutely shrinking of everything else, like the regular economy where you had corporations pulling out and it's kind of cooling down there, but a massive overheating of the military-industrial complex as they piled all their money into constructing stuff. And so it makes it look like you've got a GDP growth, but actually outside of the military-industrial complex, it wasn't looking good over the last few years. And now that military-industrial complex is stagnating or cooling down, then it gives you a much greater sense of what's going on outside of the military-industrial complex. So he says, now that the MIC, military-industrial complex, has reached its ceiling, all we have left is things going to shit. Not to mention the MIC's output into the GDP is not exactly productive. A tank doesn't create value. It goes out to kill some people. So in other words, if you're creating, I don't know, a tech company that is then bought by all these other companies, your services or your kind of software product is bought by these other companies that then increase their productivity because they bought your stuff, which is really cool. Your product feeds into the rest of the economy, and it doesn't have to be, it can be anything I'm talking about here, but it feeds into the rest of the economy and it can help shift productivity upwards. But with a tank, you're building it. Yeah, you've got supply lines going to the tank manufacturing, but the end product doesn't then go to feed any growth in the economy. It then gets sent to the front line and gets blown up. And so it's just that process of building stuff to get taken out of the country and blown up somewhere else. And this is a really a poor way of stimulating the economy, relatively speaking. So yeah, it's not exactly productive. A tank doesn't create value. It goes out to kill some people and then exploded from a drone. So this slowdown is actually doubly bad due to finally exposing and amplifying the pre-existing cracks. I think that was quite an interesting addition there. Now, having heard all of that and all that we know about what's going on, Russian economy warnings are greatly exaggerated, Putin claims, because of course he does. You would expect nothing else. The statement comes after warnings from his own officials about stagnation and looming recession. Yeah, they're over-exaggerated. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. Now, yesterday I did a breaking news piece on Sergio Gore, who may well be Sergei Gorokovsky, right in the center of the White House. Go and check that out. Lots of people are talking about that. It seems to be gathering a little bit of momentum there. I won't read that out to you, but go and check out my breaking news video from last night. It is scary if it is true. Right at the heart of a really important position in the White House. Someone that could well have been born in Russia and might well have other intentions. Okay. Kiev Independent reports that the Trump administration sends layoff notices to 600 Voice of America staff, according to the New York Times. So this is kind of the soft power propaganda arm of the United States, where they are writing articles and whatnot, doing media to support America's interests abroad. This is the Voice of America. They're cutting that down because they are becoming more isolationist, and soft power is unnecessary for them. So these isolationists would think, which is at this time in history exactly the wrong conclusion. US President Donald Trump's crackdown against Voice of America has been celebrated by Russian propagandists, of course, who welcomed the cuts to the network. No surprise there at all. So anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate your support. Hopefully that was a good indication of what's going on the front lines and we're in the war and news concerning it. I do appreciate your support. Please remember that we are, I keep forgetting to say this, we are doing a Car for Ukraine campaign. It's not the Easter Paisanki campaign. It's if you go to campaigns and then press on the summer campaign, this one, Summer Sunshine, and donate, then go to learn more, and then please go to the ATP Geopolitics. We are languishing down at 2,200 euros worth of support because I've done nothing to support this, really. I keep forgetting. So we are doing that. Please help out. The links, well, you can always find out our campaigns that we're running at atpgeo.com/donate. atpgeo.com/donate, and that should take you to this page. Thank you very much for helping out. They have patches, new patches, which I've shown you already. I've got them on my patch thing behind. Thank you to Car for Ukraine for the work that they do, and thank you to you guys for helping out with this. So please do so. It'd be fantastic. And there's the donor wall. Appreciate all of your support. Thanks to Peter Spiker as well for helping out, and Mark BizQ and Olina and others who help out support my channel as well on top of that. So thank you. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.